They say the choices we make in our darkest moments define who we truly are. But I never realized how one decision could create two entirely new lives I knew nothing about. The fluorescent lights of Wilson's Market buzzed overhead as Nelson Thomas reached for a bottle of overpriced sparkling water. At 45, he still maintained the lean physique of his college rowing days, though the constant travel and 18-hour workdays had etched permanent lines around his eyes. His shopping basket contained the sad essentials of a man who ate most meals in boardrooms or five-star restaurants: pre-cut fruit, protein bars, and single-serving packages of almonds. Nelson was scanning the wine selection when he noticed a woman in the produce section, her back to him as she examined avocados with careful attention. Something about the curve of her neck, the way she tilted her head slightly to the right, exactly like Jovie used to do. He blinked, trying to dismiss the thought. After 3 years, he still found himself doing this, seeing her in strangers, in crowds, in dreams that left him disoriented upon waking. The woman turned to place the avocados in her cart, and Nelson forgot how to breathe. Jovie, his wife. The woman who had disappeared without warning 3 years ago, leaving nothing but a brief note saying she needed time away. The woman whose absence had hollowed him out, leaving him to pour everything into Thomas Technologies until it became a billion-dollar company, as if success could fill the void she'd left behind. But what made him drop his shopping basket with a crash that drew stares from other shoppers wasn't just seeing Jovie. It was seeing what was in her shopping cart: 2 identical toddlers, about 2 years old, with his dark hair and her green eyes, babbling happily as they reached for the colorful produce. Twins, his children. Children he never knew existed. "Mama, apple!" one of them said, pointing excitedly at a display. "Yes, Jamie, those are apples." "Good job," Jovie replied, her voice exactly as Nelson remembered, warm, slightly husky, with that hint of a southern accent she could never quite shake despite years in New York. The sound of her voice unfroze him. He took a step forward, then another, moving through the produce section as if in a dream. A woman with an overloaded cart muttered in annoyance as he cut in front of her, but he barely registered it. "Jovie!" She looked up at the sound of her name, and Nelson watched as recognition, shock, and something like fear crossed her face in rapid succession. Her hand tightened on the shopping cart handle until her knuckles went white. "Nelson," she said quietly. Not a question. A statement of fact, as if she'd been preparing for this moment. The twins looked at him curiously. One of them, Jamie, offered him a half-eaten cracker with the unself-conscious generosity of toddlers. "You have children," Nelson said, the word sounding strange to his own ears. "We have children." Jovie glanced around the busy grocery store, clearly uncomfortable with having this conversation surrounded by shoppers examining fruit and comparing prices on cereal. "Yes," she finally said. "This is Jamie, and this is Lily." She indicated each twin as she spoke, her voice steady despite the tension visible in her shoulders. "They're 2.5, she added, answering the unasked question. Nelson did the math instantly. She'd been pregnant when she left. Pregnant and hadn't told him. Why? The single word contained 3 years of questions, of sleepless nights, of private investigators who found nothing, of hope that gradually hardened into resignation. Jovie looked at the twins, then back at Nelson. "Not here," she said quietly. "Please." A store employee approached, concerned about the abandoned basket and the tension radiating between them. "Is everything okay here?" "Fine," Nelson said automatically, the CEO voice taking over. "Just reconnecting with an old friend." The employee nodded and moved away, unconvinced but unwilling to challenge someone with Nelson's natural authority. "I live 10 minutes from here," Jovie said. "If you want to follow me, we can talk there." Nelson nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He watched as she finished her shopping with efficient movements, the twins now watching him with open curiosity. The little girl, Lily, had Jovie's smile, the one that had first caught his attention across a crowded charity gala 7 years ago. His children. He had children. Have you ever had your entire world turned upside down in a single moment? Have you felt the ground shift beneath your feet when you discover that everything you thought you knew was only half the truth? Nelson and Jovie had met at that charity gala for children's education. Ironic now, considering the circumstances. He'd been a rising tech entrepreneur, already making waves with his innovative security software. She'd been an art curator for the museum hosting the event, passionate and articulate about making art accessible to underprivileged communities. They'd fallen hard and fast, marrying within a year. The early days had been a whirlwind of happiness. Weekend trips to the coast, late-night conversations about their dreams, building a life together in their Manhattan penthouse with its sweeping views of Central Park. But as Thomas Technologies grew, so did the demands on Nelson's time. 18-hour days became the norm. Missed anniversaries, canceled vacations. Jovie's voice on the phone increasingly distant as he called to say he wouldn't make it home again. "I understand," she would say, though the understanding in her voice grew thinner each time. He'd promised it was temporary, just until the company stabilized, just until they secured the government contract, just until the IPO. There was always another milestone, another mountain to climb. Then came that Tuesday morning 3 years ago. He'd returned from a business trip to find the penthouse eerily quiet, her closet half empty. The note on the kitchen counter written in her elegant hand, "I need time away to think. Please don't look for me." But of course he had looked. He'd hired the best private investigators money could buy. He'd offered rewards, followed leads that went nowhere. For months, he'd been consumed by the search, until gradually, painfully, he'd accepted that she didn't want to be found. He'd poured himself into the company with renewed vigor, as if professional success could compensate for personal failure. Thomas Technologies had expanded exponentially, branching into artificial intelligence, medical technology, defense contracts. The lonely boy from a middle-class neighborhood in Ohio had become a billionaire, his face on the cover of business magazines, his name on lists of the most powerful people in tech. And none of it had filled the Jovie-shaped hole in his life. Now, following her modest sedan in his Range Rover, Nelson gripped the steering wheel so tightly his fingers ached. Questions tumbled through his mind. Why had she left? Why hadn't she told him about the pregnancy? What had happened in the 3 years since she'd walked out of their Manhattan penthouse? The drive to Jovie's house was the longest 10 minutes of Nelson's life. Her house was small but well-maintained, with a neat front yard and cheerful yellow door. Nothing like the sleek, minimalist spaces she'd always preferred when they were together. Nelson parked behind her and sat for a moment, gathering himself before stepping out into the cool autumn air. By the time he reached the front door, Jovie had already taken the twins inside. She reappeared in the doorway, her expression guarded. "They're having a snack," she explained. "It's their routine after shopping." Nelson nodded, suddenly unsure what to do with his hands, with his face, with the storm of emotions threatening to overwhelm his carefully constructed composure. The living room was cozy and lived in with toys, neatly organized in colorful bins and framed finger paintings on the walls. Through an open doorway, he could see the twins in booster seats at a kitchen table, happily eating apple slices and cheese. "They look like you," he said, his voice rough. "Around the eyes." "They have your stubbornness," Jovie replied, a ghost of a smile crossing her face before disappearing. "And your dimples." The small talk felt absurd, given the circumstances. But Nelson couldn't find the words to ask the real questions. Instead, he found himself staring at the evidence of a life built without him. Family photos on the mantel, Jovie with the twins as newborns, at their first birthday, at a pumpkin patch, a calendar on the wall marked with playgroups and doctor appointments, tiny shoes lined up by the door. "Why didn't you tell me?" he finally asked, turning to face her. "About them, about being pregnant. You just left." Jovie sank onto the sofa, suddenly looking tired. "It's complicated, Nelson. Uncomplicated," he said, remaining standing. "You owe me that much." She looked up at him, her green eyes, the same ones that had haunted his dreams for 3 years, steady and clear. "I left because I found out what you did to Robert Klein." The name hit Nelson like cold water. Robert Klein, his former business partner, the man who had nearly destroyed everything Nelson had built in the early days of Thomas Technologies. "What are you talking about?" he asked, but his voice lacked conviction. "I found the files, Nelson, the ones showing how you set him up to take the fall for the security breach, how you planted evidence that he was selling company secrets when it was actually that intern. What was his name?" "Greg?" The one you caught but decided to use to your advantage. Nelson felt the blood drain from his face. No one knew about that. No one except his head of security, who had helped him execute the plan that had sent Robert Klein to prison for 18 months while saving Thomas. Technologies from a scandal that would have destroyed investor confidence. How did you— It doesn't matter how I found out, Jovie interrupted. What matters is that I did. The man I married, the man I thought I knew, would never have done something like that. Would never have let an innocent person go to prison to protect a company. It wasn't just about the company, Nelson said, his voice low. Klein was going to use the breach as leverage for a hostile takeover. He would have fired half our employees, stripped the patents, and sold everything off piece by piece. I protected thousands of jobs. By sacrificing one man's life, Jovie countered. His wife left him while he was in prison. Did you know that? His daughter wouldn't speak to him for a year. He lost everything. Nelson looked away, unable to meet her gaze. He justified his actions 1,000 times over the years, but hearing them laid bare in Jovie's voice made them sound as ugly as they truly were. When I found those files, I realized I didn't know who you were anymore, Jovie continued. And then I found out I was pregnant, and I couldn't raise children with someone capable of that kind of calculation, that kind of coldness. So you just left? Nelson asked, anger finally breaking through the shock. Without giving me a chance to explain? Without telling me I was going to be a father? I was scared, Jovie admitted quietly. Not of you, exactly, but of what you'd become, of what power and ambition had done to you. I needed time to think, to figure out what to do. And then the doctor told me it was twins, and the pregnancy became high risk, and suddenly I was on bed rest, and— She trailed off, looking toward the kitchen where the twins were now coloring, their snack finished. One day became 1 week, became 1 month, she finished, and the longer I stayed away, the harder it seemed to come back. Nelson finally sat down, not on the sofa beside her, but in an armchair across the room. You should have told me about them, he said, his voice tight with controlled emotion. Whatever you thought of me, they're my children too. I know, Jovie said, surprising him. That's why I came back to New York 3 months ago. I was going to contact you, to try to figure out some kind of co-parenting arrangement. But then I saw the news about your engagement to Sophia Reeves, and I thought maybe it was better to leave the past in the past. Nelson stared at her. My what? Your engagement. It was in all the business news. Tech billionaire to wed hotel heiress. There were photos of you two at some gala, her wearing a massive diamond ring. Understanding dawned on Nelson's face. That wasn't an engagement ring, that was her grandmother's. Sophia and I serve on the same charitable foundation board. We've never even dated. Oh, Jovie said, looking genuinely surprised. The articles implied. The articles always imply, Nelson said with a hint of bitterness. It sells more advertising. A small silence fell between them, broken only by the sounds of the twins chattering to each other in the kitchen. There hasn't been anyone serious, Nelson said finally. Not since you. Jovie looked down at her hands, at the bare finger where her wedding ring used to be. I didn't know. There's a lot we don't know about each other anymore, Nelson said. 3 years is a long time. Have you ever realized that a single misunderstanding could change the entire course of your life? If you're as shocked as I am by this revelation, hit the like button so we can expose how easily the media can destroy families with false stories. Jovie nodded, then seemed to come to a decision. Would you like to meet them? Properly, I mean, not just staring at them across a grocery store. The offer caught Nelson off guard. He'd been preparing for a fight, for legal threats, for the cold, strategic approach that had served him so well in business. He hadn't expected this simple human gesture. Yes, he said, his voice suddenly hoarse. I'd like that very much. Jovie called the twins in from the kitchen. They came running, energy seemingly inexhaustible in the way of toddlers everywhere. Jamie, Lily, she said, kneeling to their level. This is someone very special. This is your daddy. The word hung in the air between them. Daddy. A title Nelson had never expected to hold, had never prepared for. Jamie, the more outgoing of the two, approached first. You're tall, he observed, looking up at Nelson with frank curiosity. Despite everything, Nelson found himself smiling. Yes, I am. Mama says I'll be tall too when I grow up, Jamie continued. Like my daddy. The simple statement, delivered with a child's matter-of-fact confidence, broke something open inside Nelson. He knelt down to the twins' level, bringing himself face to face with his children for the first time. "It's very nice to meet you both," he said, his voice gentle in a way Jovie had never heard before, not even in their most intimate moments. Lily, shyer than her brother, half hid behind Jovie's leg, but watched Nelson with intense interest. She was clutching a well-loved stuffed elephant, its fabric worn smooth from constant handling. "That's a nice elephant," Nelson said to her. "His name is Ellie," Lily said quietly. "He keeps the bad dreams away." "That's a very important job," Nelson replied seriously. Lily nodded, then, in the impulsive way of children, stepped forward and placed Ellie in Nelson's hand. "You can hold him," she offered. "Just for a minute." The simple trust in the gesture made Nelson's throat tighten. He accepted the elephant carefully, as if being handed something infinitely precious, which, in a way, he was. "Thank you," he said. "I'll take very good care of him." Jovie watched the interaction, her expression a complex mixture of emotions. "They usually have playtime now, then lunch, then naps," she said. "If you want to stay." "I'd like that," Nelson said, still holding the elephant as Lily began to warm up, showing him her favorite picture book. As the morning stretched into afternoon, Nelson found himself drawn into the rhythms of his children's lives. He helped build a block tower with Jamie, read 3 stories to Lily, and watched in amazement as Jovie handled the controlled chaos of toddler lunchtime with practiced efficiency. He noticed how Jamie always wanted his sandwich cut into triangles, not squares. How Lily hummed softly to herself while eating, how Jovie seemed to anticipate their needs before they even expressed them. A napkin ready just before Jamie spilled his milk. A gentle reminder to Lily to use her spoon instead of fingers for yogurt. This was the life that had been happening without him. These were the moments he'd missed. First words, first steps, first everything. The thought created an ache so profound he had to look away for a moment, focusing on the refrigerator covered with finger paintings and magnetic letters. "Are you okay?" Jovie asked quietly while the twins were distracted by their food. "No," Nelson answered honestly, "but I will be." After lunch, Jovie led the twins to their bedroom for naps. Nelson followed, watching from the doorway as she tucked them in with practiced movements. Jamie's blanket pulled up to his chin just how he liked it, Lily's collection of stuffed animals arranged in a specific order around her. "Daddy stay?" Lily asked sleepily, her eyes already drooping. The question caught both adults off guard. Jovie looked at Nelson, leaving the decision to him. "I'll be here when you wake up," he promised, surprised by how easily the words came. When the twins were finally settled, Nelson and Jovie found themselves alone again in the living room, the weight of unresolved questions still between them, but somehow less oppressive than before. "They're amazing," Nelson said quietly, mindful of little ears that might not be fully asleep yet. "You've done an incredible job with them." "It hasn't been easy," Jovie admitted. "My parents have helped a lot. Dad watches them when I'm at work." "You're working?" Nelson asked, realizing how little he knew about her life now. "I teach art at the community college," she said. "Part-time for now, while they're still so young, but I love it." Nelson nodded, remembering how she'd always loved art, a passion he'd never fully understood or appreciated. Another failure to add to his growing list. "I remember when you talked about teaching someday," he said. "Back when we first met. You said art should be for everyone, not just people who could afford museum memberships." Jovie looked surprised that he remembered. "That's exactly what I tell my students on the first day of class." A small silence fell between them, not uncomfortable but thoughtful. "What happens now?" Nelson asked, the question that had been hovering unspoken between them all day. Jovie took a deep breath. "I don't know exactly, but they deserve to have their father in their lives. I've always known that, even when I was angry and hurt and scared." "I want to be part of their lives," Nelson said firmly. "Whatever that looks like, whatever we need to work out between us." "It won't be simple," Jovie warned. "There's a lot of history, a lot of hurt." "I know," Nelson acknowledged, "but nothing worthwhile ever is simple." He hesitated, then continued. I've changed, Jovie. What happened with Klein? I'm not proud of it. After you left, I had a lot of time to think about the kind of person I'd become, the kind of company I was building. We settled with him last year. Financially, publicly, I admitted what I'd done. Jovie looked surprised. I didn't know that. It was kept fairly quiet, part of the agreement, but it was the right thing to do, even if it came too late. What made you do it? Jovie asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. Nelson looked down at his hands. Honestly, after you left, I kept asking myself what had gone so wrong, how I'd lost sight of the person I wanted to be. I started the company to create something meaningful, to solve real problems. Somewhere along the way, it became about winning at all costs. He looked up, meeting her eyes. I realized I didn't like the person I'd become, the person who could justify sending an innocent man to prison because it was expedient, the person who missed his wife's birthday dinner 3 years in a row because there was always something more important at the office. The settlement with Klein was the first step, he continued. I've been trying to rebuild the company culture too, more transparency, better work-life balance for employees. I still work too much, but I'm trying to remember why I started in the first place. Jovie studied him, searching for something in his face. That sounds like progress. It's a start, Nelson agreed. Not enough, but a start. Another silence fell between them, this one heavier with the weight of past mistakes and possible futures. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Nelson continued, or for us to pick up where we left off. That's not possible and maybe not even desirable after everything. But I'm asking for a chance to be a father to Jamie and Lily, to get to know them, and for them to know me. Jovie nodded slowly. They need that. They need you. And what do you need, Jovie? Nelson asked quietly. The question seemed to catch her off guard. She looked away toward the hallway where the twins were sleeping. Time, she finally said. Time to figure out how we do this. How we co-parent without confusing them or hurting each other more than we already have. I can give you time, Nelson said. But I'd like to see them regularly, to be part of their routine, not just a weekend visitor. That would mean you staying in town, Jovie pointed out. Your life, your company is in New York. I can work remotely, Nelson said without hesitation. At least part of the time. I have a good executive team. It's about time I trusted them to handle more day-to-day operations. Jovie looked at him with something like wonder. You'd do that? Restructure your entire life? They're my children, Jovie, Nelson said simply. What wouldn't I do? The twins' nap lasted another hour, during which Nelson and Jovie began the delicate process of negotiating their new reality. They talked about schedules, about how to introduce Nelson gradually into the twins' lives, about boundaries and expectations. It was strange how quickly they fell back into their old rhythm of problem-solving together. Jovie, practical and grounded. Nelson thinking in systems and contingencies. For a brief moment it almost felt like before, when they'd been partners in every sense of the word. When Jamie's voice called from the bedroom, they both rose automatically. Jovie smiled slightly at the synchronicity. They'll be hungry again, she said. They always wake up ready for a snack. What can I do to help? Nelson asked. There are graham crackers in the pantry, Jovie said, and they like apple juice, but it needs to be watered down a little. Nelson nodded, heading to the kitchen while Jovie went to get the twins. He found the crackers easily, arranged them on small plates, and located the juice in the refrigerator. As he diluted it in colorful plastic cups, he was struck by the domesticity of the moment. How ordinary and yet how profound. The twins bounded into the kitchen, sleep-tousled and energetic. Lily made a beeline for Nelson, checking that he was indeed still there as promised. You stayed, she said, sounding pleased but not surprised, as if she'd never doubted his word. I said I would, Nelson replied, handing her a cup of juice. Thank you, she said politely, then added, Ellie had a good nap, too. I'm glad to hear it, Nelson said seriously. Keeping away bad dreams is tiring work. Jamie climbed onto a chair at the table, reaching for a graham cracker. Can we go to the park after snack? He asked, looking between his parents. His parents. The phrase echoed in Nelson's mind, both foreign and right. Jovie glanced at Nelson. That might be nice if your daddy has time. I have time, Nelson said immediately. "I'd love to go to the park." The afternoon unfolded with a trip to the neighborhood playground, where Nelson pushed the twins on swings, caught them at the bottom of slides, and marveled at their fearless climbing. He found himself laughing more than he had in years, genuinely delighting in their enthusiasm and energy. Jovie watched from a nearby bench, her expression thoughtful. When Nelson sat beside her during a moment when the twins were absorbed in the sandbox, she turned to him. "They like you," she said simply. "They're easy to like," Nelson replied. "They're incredible, Jovie. Smart, funny, kind. You've done an amazing job raising them." "They make it easy," she said, but he could see the pride in her eyes. "They've been the center of my world since they were born." "I wish I'd been there," Nelson said quietly. "For the birth, for those first moments." Jovie's expression softened. "It was chaotic. Emergency C-section at 36 weeks. They were so tiny. Jamie just over 5 pounds, Lily not even 5. They spent 2 weeks in the NICU." Nelson tried to imagine it. Jovie alone, recovering from surgery, 2 premature babies in incubators. The image made his chest ache. "Were you scared?" he asked. "Terrified," she admitted, "but they were fighters from the start. The nurses called Lily the boss because she would cry whenever they moved Jamie to a different position in the nursery. Even then, she was looking out for him." Nelson smiled, recognizing the protective instinct he'd already observed in his daughter. "And Jamie?" "Always curious, always watching everything. The doctor said they'd never seen a preemie so alert, so engaged with his surroundings." As Jovie shared stories of the twins' early days, Nelson listened with hungry attention, trying to fill in the gaps of the time he'd missed. Each detail was precious. Jamie's first word, ball. Lily's determination to walk before she could even crawl. Their first birthday celebration in Jovie's parents' backyard. When the sun began to set, they gathered the twins and headed back to the house. Nelson helped with dinner preparation, following Jovie's instructions to cut vegetables into tiny, toddler-friendly pieces. The 4 of them ate together at the kitchen table, and Nelson found himself studying his children's faces, memorizing their expressions, the sound of their laughter. After dinner came bath time, a riotous affair involving more water on the bathroom floor than seemed possible. Nelson knelt beside the tub, helping to wash tiny backs and shampoo dark curls, amazed at how natural it felt, as if he'd been doing this every night for years instead of for the first time. Bedtime brought stories, the twins insisting that Daddy read this one, and Daddy do the voices. Nelson obliged, his deep voice bringing to life characters from well-worn picture books, delighting in the twins' reactions. When they were finally tucked in, drowsy but fighting sleep, Lily reached for his hand. "Will you be here tomorrow?" she asked, her green eyes, so like Jovie's, serious in her small face. Nelson glanced at Jovie, who stood in the doorway watching. She gave a small nod. "Yes," he told Lily. "I'll be here tomorrow." "Promise?" Jamie chimed in from his bed. "I promise," Nelson said, the weight of the words settling on him like a mantle, a promise to his children, the first of many he intended to keep. When the twins were finally asleep, Nelson and Jovie retreated to the living room. The day had been emotionally exhausting, filled with more revelations and adjustments than either had anticipated when they woke that morning. "I should go," Nelson said reluctantly. "Let you get some rest, but I'll be back in the morning if that's okay." "It's okay," Jovie said. "They'll be looking for you. They don't warm up to people this quickly usually." "They're incredible," Nelson said again, unable to find adequate words for the miracle of his children. "Thank you for today, for letting me into their lives." Jovie nodded, walking him to the door. "We have a lot to figure out still," she reminded him. "This is just the beginning." "I know," Nelson agreed, "but it's a good beginning." As he stood on the porch, the evening air cool against his face, Nelson felt something shift inside him. A realignment of priorities, a clarification of what truly mattered. "Jovie," he said, turning back to her, "I want you to know that I understand why you left. I don't agree with how you did it, but I understand why. And I'm sorry for who I became, for the choices I made that drove you away." She studied him in the porch light, her expression unreadable. "Thank you for saying that," she said finally. "It means something hearing you acknowledge it." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. As Nelson drove back to his hotel, his mind was filled not with the business deals and strategic plans that had occupied it for years, but with images of tiny hands building block towers, gap-toothed smiles, and trusting eyes looking to him for stories and reassurance. He had children. He was a father, and somehow in the space of a single day, that identity had become more important than any title he'd ever held. The next morning, Nelson arrived at Jovie's house just as the twins were finishing breakfast. They greeted him with enthusiasm, as if his presence was already an established part of their routine. Lily immediately showed him a drawing she'd made, stick figures that she identified as Mama, Jamie, me, and you, Daddy. "It's beautiful," Nelson told her, genuinely moved by the simple inclusion in her family portrait. "May I keep it?" Lily nodded solemnly, pleased by his appreciation of her artwork. Over the next few days, a pattern began to emerge. Nelson would arrive in the morning, spend the day with the twins and Jovie, then reluctantly leave in the evening after bedtime stories. He rented a furnished apartment nearby, extending his stay indefinitely. His executive team in New York adapted to virtual meetings and his new schedule, some expressing surprise at the change, but all respecting the brief explanation he provided. "Family matters require my presence here for the foreseeable future." On the 5th day, while the twins were napping, Nelson and Jovie sat at the kitchen table with calendars and notebooks, working out a more formal co-parenting arrangement. "I'd like to take them to New York eventually," Nelson said. "Not right away, but when they're comfortable with me, they should see where I live, meet my parents." Jovie nodded. "That makes sense, maybe in a few months, once they've adjusted to having you in their lives." "And holidays," Nelson continued. "I'd like to be part of those. Thanksgiving, Christmas, birthdays." "Of course," Jovie agreed. "They should have those memories with both of us." They continued planning, discussing preschool options, pediatrician appointments, the twins' different personalities and needs. It was the most civil, productive conversation they'd had in years, both focused entirely on what was best for Jamie and Lily. As they finished, Nelson looked up to find Jovie watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "What?" he asked. "You're different," she said simply. The Nelson I knew 3 years ago would have approached this like a business negotiation, efficiency over emotion, outcomes over process. Nelson considered this. "I suppose I am different. Losing you, searching for you, then finding out about the twins, it changes your perspective, makes you realize what actually matters." He hesitated, then added, "Meeting them has been like finding a piece of myself I never knew was missing. I don't want to be the father who prioritizes work over family. I've seen what that costs." Jovie nodded, understanding in her eyes. "They have a way of rearranging your priorities. The first time I held them in the NICU, everything else just fell away." A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the soft sounds of the twins stirring from their nap. The moment felt significant somehow. The first time they'd truly connected, not just as co-parents negotiating terms, but as two people who once shared a life and might, perhaps, find a new way forward. The following weeks fell into a rhythm. Nelson became a fixture in the twins' lives, learning their routines, their preferences, their little personalities. He discovered that Jamie loved dinosaurs and could name an impressive number of them. That Lily sang to herself when she thought no one was listening. That both twins had inherited his sweet tooth and Jovie's artistic talent. He found himself changing in ways both subtle and profound. His phone stayed in his pocket during playtime. Emails went unanswered for hours while he built elaborate block structures or colored pictures of princesses riding dinosaurs. Conference calls were scheduled around nap times and bedtimes. One evening, after the twins were asleep, Nelson and Jovie sat on her back porch, the autumn air crisp around them. They'd fallen into the habit of these evening conversations, debriefing the day, discussing the twins' development, planning for the future. "My lease on the apartment is up next week," Nelson said, breaking a comfortable silence. "I've been thinking about finding something more permanent. A house, maybe, with a yard. Somewhere close by." Jovie looked at him, surprise evident in her expression. "You're really staying? What about the company?" I've been working remotely for almost a month now, Nelson pointed out. It's going better than I expected. The executive team is stepping up. And yes, I'm really staying. The twins need consistency, not a father who flies in and out of their lives. What about New York? Jovie asked. Your life there? Nelson shrugged. The penthouse never felt like home after you left. Just a place to sleep between meetings. The company doesn't need me physically present anymore. We've gone global, with offices in 6 countries. I can lead from anywhere. He looked out at the small backyard, where the twins' tricycles and outdoor toys were neatly arranged. Besides, there's nothing for me in New York that compares to what I have here. The simple honesty in his voice caught Jovie off guard. She studied his profile in the fading light, seeing both the ambitious entrepreneur she'd married and this newer, more grounded version who prioritized bedtime stories over board meetings. The twins would love having you nearby, she said finally. They ask for you on the rare days you can't make it for breakfast. Just the twins? Nelson asked quietly, turning to meet her gaze. Jovie looked away, but not before he caught the flicker of emotion in her eyes. It's complicated, Nelson. We're not the same people we were 3 years ago. No, he agreed. We're not. Maybe that's a good thing. The next day, Nelson arrived with coffee for Jovie and pastries for everyone. The twins greeted him with their usual enthusiasm, Jamie immediately showing him a new toy truck, while Lily demanded to be picked up for her morning hug. As they settled into breakfast, Jovie's phone rang. She glanced at the screen, frowning slightly. I need to take this, she said. It's the college. Can you? Go, Nelson assured her. We've got this, right, guys? The twins nodded, mouths full of pastry. Jovie stepped into the other room. Nelson helped Lily with her juice and listened to Jamie's elaborate story about a dream involving dinosaurs and spaceships, all while keeping an ear tuned to Jovie's conversation. When she returned, her expression was troubled. Everything okay? Nelson asked. One of my colleagues is sick. They need someone to cover her classes today, Jovie explained, glancing at the clock. The first one starts in an hour, but my dad can't watch the twins today. He has a doctor's appointment. I'll watch them, Nelson said immediately. Jovie hesitated. Are you sure? You've never had them on your own for a full day. I'm sure, Nelson said. We'll be fine, right, team? Daddy Day, Jamie exclaimed, clearly excited by the prospect. Lily looked less certain. Mama come back? Of course I'll come back, sweetheart, Jovie assured her. Just after my classes. Daddy will take good care of you until then. Lily considered this, then nodded, apparently satisfied. If you're sure, Jovie said to Nelson. Positive, he replied. Go teach your students about art. We'll have an adventure here. After Jovie left, Nelson found himself alone with his children for the first time. The responsibility settled on his shoulders, not a burden, but a privilege he hadn't expected to have. All right, what should we do today? He asked the twins. Park, Jamie suggested immediately. Painting, Lily countered, her love of art already evident at 2.5. How about both? Nelson proposed. Painting this morning, park after lunch, and nap. This compromise was met with enthusiastic approval. Nelson helped the twins into art smocks he found hanging on hooks in the playroom, set up paper on the kitchen table, and brought out the washable paints Jovie kept in a cabinet. What followed was both chaotic and joyful. Paint somehow ended up not just on paper, but on little hands, faces, and, despite the smocks, clothes. Nelson found himself with a blue handprint on his shirt and green streaks in his hair, but the twins' delight in creating their masterpieces made it all worthwhile. Cleanup took longer than the actual painting, involving multiple washcloths and a change of clothes for everyone. By the time they finished, it was nearly lunchtime. Nelson surveyed the kitchen, which despite his best efforts still bore evidence of their creative morning. What does Mama usually make for lunch? He asked. Sandwich, Jamie informed him, with no crusts. And apple slices, Lily added helpfully. Nelson nodded, grateful for the guidance. Sandwiches and apple slices it is. Lunch preparation proved simpler than art supervision, though Nelson discovered that sandwich assembly for toddlers involved specific requirements he hadn't anticipated. Jamie's needed to be cut into triangles, not squares. Lily wouldn't eat hers if the peanut butter and jelly mixed too much. Both required their apple slices arranged in a specific pattern on their plates. After lunch came the challenge of naptime. The twins, perhaps sensing Nelson's inexperience, tested boundaries they wouldn't have with Jovie. Jamie insisted he wasn't tired. Lily wanted 3 more stories than usual. Nelson navigated these negotiations with patience he didn't know he possessed, eventually succeeding in getting both children settled. As they finally drifted off to sleep, he stood in the doorway watching them, overwhelmed by a surge of love so powerful it left him breathless. These were his children, his responsibility, his greatest joy. While they slept, he tackled the remaining evidence of their morning art session, wanting to surprise Jovie with a clean house when she returned. As he wiped paint from the kitchen table, he found himself smiling at the memory of Lily's concentrated expression as she created what she solemnly informed him was a rainbow elephant family. The twins woke refreshed and ready for their promised park adventure. Nelson packed a bag with snacks, water bottles, and extra clothes, learning quickly that outings with toddlers required preparation akin to a military campaign. At the park, he watched them play, marveling at their energy and resilience. Jamie made friends instantly with another boy at the sandbox, while Lily methodically climbed every structure available, her determination evident in her furrowed brow. Nelson pushed them on swings, caught them at the bottom of slides, and joined in their games with an abandon that would have shocked his business associates. The CEO who commanded boardrooms and negotiated billion-dollar deals was now crawling through a play tunnel, making monster noises that sent his children into fits of giggles. They were at the park when Jovie found them after her classes. She stood at the edge of the playground for a moment, watching unobserved as Nelson helped Lily across the monkey bars, his strong hands supporting her tiny ones, his face a study in concentration and joy. "Mama!" Jamie spotted her first, running across the playground to hug her legs. Nelson looked up, his face breaking into a smile that matched his son's. "Hey, how were your classes?" "Good," Jovie said, lifting Jamie into her arms. "How was your day?" "The best," Nelson replied simply. "We painted, we had lunch, we conquered nap time, and now we're mastering the playground. Right, team?" Lily, having completed her monkey bar journey, ran to join them. "Mama, I painted an elephant family, and Daddy helped me reach the high monkey bars, and we had sandwiches with no crusts." "Sounds like you had quite a day," Jovie said, smiling at her daughter's enthusiasm. "We did," Nelson confirmed, "though I think I may have permanently dyed part of my hair green." Jovie laughed, noticing for the first time the faint green tinge to a section of his dark hair. "Hazards of toddler art projects. It'll wash out. Eventually." As they walked home together, the twins running ahead, then waiting for their parents to catch up, Nelson felt a sense of rightness he hadn't experienced in years. This simple family moment was what he'd been missing while chasing success and status. "Thank you for today," Jovie said quietly as they watched the twins examining a particularly interesting rock on the sidewalk. "For stepping up like that." "Thank you for trusting me with them," Nelson replied. "It means more than I can say." Their eyes met briefly, an understanding passing between them that went beyond words. They were building something here. Not the relationship they'd had before, but something new, something potentially stronger. That evening, after dinner and baths and bedtime stories, after the twins were finally asleep, Nelson and Jovie sat in the living room with cups of tea. The day had brought them closer in a way that weeks of careful co-parenting hadn't quite managed. "I found a house," Nelson said after a comfortable silence. 3 bedrooms, good-sized yard, just a few blocks from here. I'm going to make an offer tomorrow." Jovie nodded, unsurprised. "The twins will love having their own rooms when they stay with you." "That's the plan," Nelson agreed, "though I was thinking 1 room for them to share, at least initially. They're used to being together. The 3rd bedroom could be a playroom." "You've thought this through," Jovie observed. "I have," Nelson admitted. "I want to do this right, Jovie. I've missed so much already. I don't want to miss anything else." Jovie studied him over the rim of her teacup. "You know, when I left, I was so angry, so hurt. I thought I knew exactly who you were. Someone who'd lost his moral compass, who'd sacrificed his integrity for success." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "But watching you with the twins these past weeks, I'm seeing sides of you I'd forgotten existed. or maybe sides that weren't fully developed before. Fatherhood changes you, Nelson said simply. Makes you want to be better, to be worthy of them. Yes, Jovie agreed softly. It does. Another silence fell between them, this one charged with unspoken possibilities. Jovie, Nelson began carefully. I know we can't go back to what we were. Too much has happened, but I wonder if we might find a way forward, not just as co-parents, but as something more, eventually. Jovie didn't answer immediately, her expression thoughtful. I don't know, Nelson. There's still so much to work through. Trust to rebuild. I understand, he said, trying to hide his disappointment. I'm not asking for an answer now, just leaving the door open. Jovie nodded, a small smile touching her lips. The door isn't closed, she said. That's all I can offer right now. It's enough, Nelson replied, and meant it. The weeks that followed brought changes both practical and profound. Nelson closed on the house, furnishing it with the twins in mind. Sturdy, comfortable pieces that could withstand toddler enthusiasm. A backyard playset. Bedrooms decorated with dinosaurs and rainbows according to their preferences. The twins began spending occasional nights there at first, with Jovie staying in the guest room to ease the transition. Then on their own with their father. Nelson learned the intricacies of bedtime routines, the importance of specific stuffed animals, the exact right temperature for bathwater. Professionally, he continued to lead Thomas Technologies remotely, delegating more responsibility to his executive team, scheduling video conferences around the twins' schedules rather than the other way around. To his surprise, the company didn't suffer from his reduced presence. If anything, it thrived as other leaders stepped up and brought fresh perspectives. One evening, about 3 months after their chance encounter in the grocery store, Nelson invited Jovie to dinner at his house after the twins were asleep. He cooked himself, a skill he'd been developing with the same focus he once applied to business strategies, and set the table on the back patio, with candles and flowers that reminded him of their first date years ago. This is lovely, Jovie said, looking around at the thoughtfully arranged setting. What's the occasion? No occasion, Nelson replied, pouring her a glass of wine. Just wanted to do something nice, to say thank you. For what? Jovie asked, accepting the glass. For giving me a second chance with the twins, Nelson said, for not shutting me out of their lives, even though you had every reason to. Jovie smiled, the candlelight softening her features. They love you so much already. It's amazing to watch. I love them too, Nelson said simply, more than I ever thought possible. They ate and talked, the conversation flowing easily between topics. The twins' latest developments, Jovie's classes, Nelson's new approach to business. It felt almost like before, in the early days of their relationship, before ambition and secrets had created a chasm between them. As they finished dessert, a store-bought cheesecake, Nelson admitted he wasn't yet confident enough to attempt baking himself. Jovie looked at him with newfound appreciation. You really have changed, she said. Not just saying the right things, but actually living differently. Nelson nodded, acknowledging the truth in her observation. Losing you was the wake-up call I needed. Finding out about the twins gave me the motivation to actually change, not just talk about it. He hesitated, then continued. I've been thinking a lot about what happened with Klein, about the kind of person I became during those years, the choices I made. And, Jovie prompted gently. And I don't like who I was, Nelson admitted. The ambition, the drive, those weren't bad things in themselves. But somewhere along the way I started believing that the ends justified the means. That success was worth any price. He looked directly at Jovie, his expression open and vulnerable in a way she'd rarely seen. You were right to leave, to protect the twins from that version of me. I wouldn't want that man raising my children either. The honesty in his voice touched something deep in Jovie. Thank you for saying that, she said quietly. For understanding. I just wish, Nelson began, then stopped himself. What? Jovie asked. I wish you'd confronted me, he said finally, given me the chance to face what I'd done, to make it right while we were still together. But I understand why you couldn't, why you felt you had to leave. Jovie was silent for a long moment, considering his words. Maybe I should have, she acknowledged. But I was scared, Nelson. Not just of your reaction, but of my own feelings. I loved you so much, and discovering what you'd done, it shattered something in me. I wasn't sure I could trust my own judgment anymore. And now? Nelson asked, the question hanging between them. Now, Jovie said slowly, I'm starting to trust again. Not blindly, but cautiously. I see how you are with the twins, how you've reorganized your entire life around them, how you're trying to make amends for past mistakes. She reached across the table, taking his hand in a gesture that felt monumental after months of careful distance. I'm not ready to jump back into a relationship. There's still too much to work through. But I'm open to the possibility of something, of seeing where this goes. Nelson turned his hand to clasp hers, hope blooming in his chest. That's all I'm asking for, a chance. As they sat together under the stars, hands linked across the table, Nelson felt a sense of possibility that had been absent from his life for too long. Not the calculated optimism he projected in boardrooms, but genuine hope, messy, complicated, and absolutely worth fighting for. One day at a time, Jovie said softly, echoing the approach they'd taken with the twins. One day at a time, Nelson agreed. The following months brought a gradual thawing of the barriers between them. Family outings that had once been carefully orchestrated co-parenting exercises became more natural, more enjoyable. Movie nights with the twins often extended into conversations between Nelson and Jovie long after the children were asleep. Small touches, a hand on a shoulder, fingers brushing while passing a coffee cup, no longer felt charged with awkwardness, but instead with a tentative warmth. Winter arrived, bringing with it the twins' third birthday in the holiday season. Nelson threw himself into both with enthusiasm that amused and touched Jovie. The birthday party he helped plan featured a dinosaur princess theme that perfectly captured the twins' current obsessions, with a cake that had taken 3 attempts to get right. You didn't have to go to all this trouble, Jovie said, as they watched the twins and their preschool friends demolishing cupcakes in the backyard of Nelson's house. I wanted to, Nelson replied simply. I missed their first 2 birthdays. I'm making up for lost time. Christmas presented a new set of considerations. Nelson's parents were eager to meet their grandchildren, having been kept updated through video calls but not yet introduced in person. Would you be comfortable with them coming here for Christmas? Nelson asked Jovie one evening as they wrapped presents after the twins were asleep. They've booked a hotel nearby, so they wouldn't be staying with either of us. But they'd really love to meet Jamie and Lily. Jovie hesitated, scissors poised over colorful paper. What have you told them? About why I left? The truth, Nelson said, that I made choices you couldn't accept, that you left to protect yourself and the children you were carrying, that I'm working to be worthy of a second chance. Jovie nodded, resuming her cutting. Then yes, I think that would be nice. The twins should know their grandparents. Christmas morning found them all at Nelson's house, the twins wide-eyed with excitement as they discovered presents under the tree. Nelson's parents, warm, down-to-earth people who had always liked Jovie, integrated seamlessly into the celebration, delighting in their grandchildren's enthusiasm. They're wonderful, Nelson's mother told Jovie quietly as they watched the twins showing their grandfather their new toys. You've done an amazing job with them. Thank you, Jovie said, genuinely touched by the compliment. They make it easy to love them. Nelson seems different, his mother continued, glancing at her son who was on the floor helping Jamie assemble a train set. More grounded, happier. Fatherhood suits him, Jovie agreed. It's more than that, Nelson's mother said perceptively. He lost his way for a while there, got caught up in success and forgot what really matters, but he's found his way back, thanks in large part to you and those little ones. The observation stayed with Jovie throughout the day, through dinner and dessert, and the quiet evening after the twins had crashed from their sugar high, and Nelson's parents had returned to their hotel. She found herself watching Nelson with new eyes, seeing not just the changes of the past few months, but the journey that had brought him here. Your parents are wonderful with the twins, she said as they sat by the fire, the Christmas tree lights twinkling in the corner. They've been waiting a long time to be grandparents, Nelson replied with a smile. I think they'd given up hope. They said something interesting today, Jovie continued, about you finding your way back. It made me realize that's what I've been watching these past months. Not just change, but a return to the person I first fell in love with. Nelson looked at her, surprise and hope mingling in his expression. The person I always wanted to be, he said quietly, before I got distracted by the wrong priorities. Jovie moved closer on the couch, the distance between them suddenly seeming unnecessary. I've been thinking a lot about second chances, she said, about forgiveness and moving forward. And? Nelson prompted gently when she paused. And I think maybe it's time to stop being so cautious, Jovie said. We've been circling each other for months now, both wanting more but afraid to take that step. Nelson's heart quickened. What are you saying, Jovie? I'm saying I'd like to try again, she said simply. Not picking up where we left off, but starting something new, something better. The hope in Nelson's eyes bloomed into joy. I'd like that too, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Very much. When he leaned forward to kiss her, it felt both familiar and entirely new. A homecoming and a beginning all at once. Spring brought new developments. The twins started preschool 3 mornings a week, thriving in the structured environment and social interaction. Nelson's house sold, and he began looking for something larger with Jovie's input this time. What about this one? He asked one evening, showing her a listing on his tablet. 4 bedrooms, big yard, good school district, room to grow. Jovie studied the listing, then looked up at him with a raised eyebrow. Room to grow? Nelson smiled, a touch sheepishly. Just thinking ahead. The twins might want their own rooms eventually, and maybe someday. Someday, Jovie agreed, her expression softening. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We're still figuring out this new version of us. They were indeed navigating unfamiliar territory, building a relationship that honored their history while acknowledging how much they'd both changed. Date nights were scheduled around the twins' routine. Conversations often revolved around parenting challenges and triumphs. Physical intimacy was rediscovered slowly, with the sweet awkwardness of people finding their way back to each other. One weekend in late April, Nelson took Jovie and the twins to a lakeside cabin he'd rented for a mini vacation. The twins, now fully comfortable with both parents together, were excited about the prospect of fishing and hiking and making s'mores around a campfire. The first evening, after the twins were asleep in the cabin's second bedroom, Nelson and Jovie sat on the porch overlooking the moonlit lake. I have something for you, Nelson said, reaching into his pocket. Not a ring, he added quickly, seeing her expression. Not yet, though I hope someday, when we're both ready. He handed her a small box. Inside was a delicate silver pendant in the shape of an elephant. Like Lily's Ellie, Jovie said, smiling as she recognized the significance. The first gift she ever gave me, Nelson confirmed. The moment I started to believe I could be a father to them, that I could be worthy of their trust. He took the necklace from the box, moving behind Jovie to fasten it around her neck. I wanted to give you something to mark how far we've come, how grateful I am for this second chance. Jovie touched the pendant, emotion welling in her throat. It's perfect, she said softly. The next morning brought sunshine and the excited voices of the twins, eager to start their adventure. After breakfast, they headed down to the lake where Nelson had arranged for a small rowboat. Boat ride, Jamie exclaimed, jumping up and down with excitement. Fish, Lily added, clutching the tiny fishing rod Nelson had bought specially for her. They spent the morning on the lake, Nelson rowing while Jovie helped the twins with their fishing lines. No fish were caught, but the twins didn't seem to mind. Too enchanted by the experience of being on the water, spotting turtles sunning themselves on logs and watching dragonflies skim the surface. After a picnic lunch on the shore, the twins grew drowsy, the morning's excitement catching up with them. Nelson carried them back to the cabin for naps, Lily's head resting trustingly on his shoulder, Jamie already half asleep in Jovie's arms. As they tucked the twins into their beds, Jovie was struck by how natural it felt. This family they were building. So different from what she'd imagined 3 years ago when she'd left New York, pregnant and heartbroken. What are you thinking? Nelson asked as they stepped out onto the porch, leaving the cabin door ajar to hear the twins if they woke. About how life takes unexpected turns, Jovie replied. How sometimes what seems like an ending is actually a beginning. Nelson nodded, understanding in his eyes. When you left, I thought my life was over, that I'd lost the only thing that mattered. I couldn't see then that it was the wake-up call I needed, that sometimes you have to lose everything to understand what's truly important. And now? Jovie asked, stepping closer to him. Now I know what matters, Nelson said simply. You, the twins, the family we're building, everything else is just details. Jovie smiled, reaching up to touch his face. Who would have thought a chance meeting in a grocery store would lead us here? I'm just grateful it did, Nelson replied, drawing her into his arms. As they stood together on the porch, the spring breeze carrying the scent of pine and lake water, Jovie thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. The pain and separation, the secrets and revelations, the slow rebuilding of trust and discovery of new love. It hadn't been easy. It wouldn't always be easy going forward. But standing here with Nelson, their children sleeping peacefully inside, Jovie felt something she hadn't expected to feel again. A sense of rightness, of belonging, of home. That evening, after a dinner of hot dogs and s'mores that left the twins sticky and exhausted, after baths and bedtime stories and goodnight kisses, Nelson and Jovie sat by the campfire outside the cabin. The twins' laughter still echoed in the air, their joy in the simple pleasures of family time a reminder of what truly mattered. I've been thinking, Nelson said, watching the flames dance in the fire pit, about that house we looked at, the one with room to grow. What about it? Jovie asked, though she suspected where he was heading. What if we bought it together? Nelson suggested, turning to gauge her reaction. Not just as a place for me with rooms for the twins, but as a home for all of us. The proposal hung in the air between them, significant not just for what it was, but for what it represented. A commitment to building a future together, to making official what had been gradually taking shape over the past months. Jovie didn't answer immediately, giving the question the consideration it deserved. Are we ready for that? She asked finally. It's a big step. I think we are, Nelson said. We've been taking it slow, rebuilding trust, figuring out who we are now. But the truth is, Jovie, I love you. I never stopped loving you, even when I thought I'd lost you forever, and I love the family we're creating together. The simple honesty in his voice touched Jovie deeply. I love you too, she said softly. The man you've become, the father you are to our children. She reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers. Yes, she said, let's buy the house together. Let's make a home for our family. The joy that spread across Nelson's face was answer enough. He pulled her close, sealing their agreement with a kiss that held both promise and gratitude. For second chances, for unexpected blessings, for the future they would build together. As the fire crackled and the stars emerged overhead, Nelson and Jovie sat together, planning their new beginning. They talked about practical matters, moving timelines, combining households, telling the twins, but beneath the logistics ran a current of deeper meaning. This wasn't just about a house or living arrangements. It was about healing old wounds, about forgiveness and growth, about choosing love over pride or fear. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't run into each other that day at the grocery store? Jovie asked, her head resting on Nelson's shoulder. All the time, Nelson admitted. I might never have known about the twins. You might never have learned about the changes I was trying to make. We might have spent our lives apart, always wondering what might have been. I like to think we would have found our way back to each other eventually, Jovie said. That some connections are too strong to be broken permanently. Nelson smiled, pressing a kiss to her hair. I'd like to think that too. As they sat together under the stars, the future stretching before them full of possibility, Nelson felt a profound sense of gratitude. For the chance encounter that had changed everything, for Jovie's courage in giving him a second chance, for the twins who had opened his heart in ways he'd never imagined possible. 3 years ago, he'd been a different man, driven by ambition, willing to compromise his principles for success, taking for granted the love that should have been his greatest treasure. The loss of that love had broken him, but in breaking, he'd found the opportunity to rebuild himself into someone better. Someone worthy of the family he now held dear. And Jovie, who had once fled from the man he'd become, had found the strength to see the man he could be, to offer forgiveness not as an erasure of past wrongs but as a foundation for future growth. Together they had discovered that sometimes life's most painful detours lead to the most beautiful destinations, that sometimes you have to lose your way completely before finding the path home. Have you ever experienced a moment when everything in your life suddenly made sense? When past pain revealed itself as necessary for present joy? If this story touched your heart, hit the like button and subscribe to Mr. Rich Romance Stories for more tales of redemption, second chances, and the transformative power of love. Because sometimes the most unexpected encounters, like a billionaire CEO stopping dead in his tracks in a busy grocery store when he sees his missing wife holding twins he never knew existed, can become the first chapter of the most beautiful story of all, the story of a family finding its way back to each other, stronger and more loving than before.